Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session of the Elire Treasury Experience, our Oracle Cloud Cash Management product demonstration. Our presenter today is Mr. Chris Leininger. A couple of announcements that we have, final reminders. All attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of the presentation. We are going to have that live Q&A at the end here, so please submit any questions through the Q&A portal or through the chat to presenter function. And also, we will be sending out a recording of today's presentation, as well as a PDF of the slides next week following the conference. Our presenter today, Chris, is a senior consultant with Elire SaaS Treasury practice. His expertise covers on-premise and cloud Oracle products, including PeopleSoft and Oracle Cloud, specializing with accounts payable and cash management. With that, I will hand it over to Chris to get going.
All right, thank you, Jordan. And thank you everyone for joining today. Like Jordan said, my name's Chris, and I will be walking through the Oracle Cloud Cash Management product today. All right, so just a quick agenda before we get things going. I'm going to do a brief introduction into Elire and our industry experience, overview of the banking cash management modules, and what bank statement reporting, cash balances, and treasury payments, bank reconciliation, and overall reporting looks like within Oracle Cloud. And then, as Jordan had mentioned, we'll do a quick Q&A at the end. So who we are as Elire, I'm sure by the end of the day too, you guys have heard this enough, but what I'd really want to highlight here is that we're incredibly proud of the 15 years of business that we have while accumulating over 250 different clients as part of our TMS and roadmap engagement. We're also partners with Oracle, Swift, Kyriba, and FIS. Some of the practices that we offer within Elire, we have our treasury advisory services, our ERP implementation services, our cloud implementation services, and our TMS managed services practice. So today we're falling in line with our cloud implementation services and doing a demonstration of that cloud cash management product. This is just a brief NASCAR slide showing off our current clients across all the different industries that we support. So to get things going, we're going to look at a brief banking cash management overview within Oracle Cloud and what kind of represents the structure and architecture of setting up cash management. So to highlight briefly is kind of this overall day in the life of a treasury manager and sort of the tasks that correspond to what those different business processes within cash management exist. So we'll look at setting up new bank accounts, looking at performing cash positioning, making treasury payments, whether that's funding different accounts or paying external payees, and then ultimately doing a bank reconciliation within Oracle's product. So the first thing I want to highlight is within Oracle Cloud is their idea of a bank account model. What this bank account model does is it pulls together all the components of cash management. So whether that's bank statement processing, performing treasury payments, doing your cash position on a daily basis, and doing that bank reconciliation. How Oracle sets these up is how banks, branches, and accounts all fit together within this model. What this allows users to do is define a single set of bank accounts that are located in one place and explicitly grant access to different business units, to different functions, to different users, depending on the security and roles that are applied to that bank account, but also the various functions that that bank account can be used within the application. What this allows us to do is eliminate the duplicate bank account setup in different business units, so you have a single concise list and there is no error in possibly using an incorrect account. So a handful of best practices that we're looking at when we look to implement this bank account model is to assign a unique GL cash account to each bank account as it relates to recording all cash transactions for that bank account. What this allows us to do is have a more streamlined approach to reporting and able to isolate those transactions in doing so. The second note around best practices is assigning all bank statement transaction codes received by the bank. So when we start integrating in bank statements into the application, we're able to define a list of BI codes or transaction codes, depending on the payment file layout, that will help assist in the bank statement reporting. And so we want to ensure that we have all those defined up front so that we don't run into any issues downstream. And then lastly is to automate the bank reconciliation process as much as possible. It's a huge efficiency area that a lot of companies realize that cuts down on a lot of manual work that we can rely and leverage the system to use. So as we start getting into this app, into Oracle Cloud for cash management, what I wanted to highlight first is kind of the UI of Oracle Cloud. They really present a nice streamlined and sleek user interface that helps create efficiencies within building or conducting different business processes. So what we have on the screen here is a welcome message. If you're currently running Oracle Cloud, you will know that you can actually customize this UI, change logos up here, change backgrounds. What it does do for each user is provide a personalized list of various modules that they have access to that is showcased along the top here. You also have a hamburger up here, what we like to call a hamburger, but is a navigator that will show all the various pages as well. So in order to do this bank account setup, you navigate from your home screen into this others category and then select this setup and maintenance. Within setup and maintenance, it gives us a list of all the various configuration pages for Oracle Cloud. What we're able to do is kind of separate the configuration from the application pages that your day-to-day business processes are going to be conducted in. So if we drill into the setup and maintenance icon, what it provides us are the different subject areas that we can conduct various forms of configuration. So here we'll highlight our setup as financial, since we're talking about cash management, and then we find our functional area within cash management and banking. What this provides us is a list of required tasks that are needed to set up the configuration in order to get cash management up and running. So the 5 required tasks are going to be your transaction code. So again, importing in those BI statements or bank statements, and then defining your bank branches, and your bank accounts. As common with most ERPs, when you define your bank at that high level, it's really description based. And then as you get into your different branches and your accounts, that's where you define more data inputs that are related to actual processing. So within Oracle Cloud, you capture ABA routing numbers, bit codes within the bank branch setup. And then once we drill into a specific bank account, that allows us to define more data inputs that are required in terms of processing using that bank account. So what we're going to go ahead and do is drill into this manage bank accounts task. When we drill into that, what this shows us is a search page that allows users to conduct a number of different searches based on the bank accounts entered into Oracle Cloud. So we can conduct searches based on a specific account name, account number. If we want to look at all various currencies, any legal entity that bank accounts are associated to, a specific bank, branch, or even country. One thing I do want to highlight is this asterisk. The double asterisk is a required field, as is the note says over here. So you cannot conduct a search unless that has been populated. For the purpose of this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill into our city bank account. So you can see I've conducted that search. Our search results are displayed at the bottom, and then I'll click into that hyperlink, which will then pull up our bank account information. And this is where we store the majority of the configuration as it relates to our bank account and as it relates to cash management. So we have our header section where we denote the banking attributes, or the bank branch it's associated to, the account name, and that specific account number. What Oracle delivers is an auto masking that shows the last 4 digits of that bank account. So you have security regarding that. There's actually been a recent release earlier this year that allows you to expand that up to 6 digits. So I know a lot of organizations like to show only the last remaining 4 digits of a bank account, and that's how they identify it by. But Oracle's expanded that to only mask up to the last 6. Within this header, another key field I want to highlight is going to be this account use page. What this does is it shows the different modules that this bank account is used under. So delivered, we have our payables module, our payroll module, and our receivables module. In Oracle Cloud, cash management is housed under the payables module. So a key thing is if you have the license for Oracle payables, you actually have the license for cash management as well too. So for the majority of the accounts we would set up in order to perform that cash positioning or that cash reconciliation, we would have that payables check box checked. Once we get our header information defined, we are then able to get into more bank account specific configuration fields. So this attributes to our GL accounts that this account uses. So we are able to define a specific string to our cash account and our cash clearing accounts, and also any reconciliation differences. So if you're doing a typical reconciliation today, when you match a pair, but let's say there's amount tolerance there, we can define based from the bank account the specific account coding that is going to be used to account for that difference. And then the last field on this page I want to highlight is within additional information. This is where we denote if a field has been active or not. So if we need, in order to inactivate bank accounts, we'd come here, uncheck that field, and then the application will recognize it as an inactive bank account. So that's our general bank account configuration. If we move to the next tab, this is where we define more controls. And this is where the majority of the cash management configuration is housed inside the bank account. So when, if you're doing cash positioning, the cash position report will look at the target balance that you have defined down here, look at the transaction calendar that is being used, but also when you start using cash management for reconciliation. There's a handful of other reconciliation pages that we'll get to inside this deck in a minute or a little later on, but we assign all that configuration at the bank account level. So we'll be able to define our exchange rate type, our auto recon rule set. So Oracle Cloud has this idea of reconciliation rule sets, which is a group of matching rules. But again, we'll get to that in a minute. We're able to define any bank statement parsing. So if we have data received into our application from a bank statement that we want to manipulate in a way that helps us increase the hit rate of reconciliation, we can define how those rules are set up here. And then this last piece is going to be our bank statement transaction creation rules. What these bank statement transaction creation rules are really a way for us to reconcile first presentment items from the bank. So our bank fees, our interest, our any bank charges, we're able to capture those and assign specific rules at a bank account level. So we may not always have one rule, that works across all bank accounts. We can, get down to the granularity of defining certain specific rules for specific bank accounts. This next tab for security allows these bank accounts to be locked down by user or role level. So we can define specific users who only have access to this bank account, or we can define a specific role within the application that has access to this bank account. So an example for this is if this account is only used for payables, we can have the payables manager role defined here, and only certain users who have that role can access this account then. So it provides, depending on the level of security that your organization needs as it relates to bank accounts, we're able to provide more secure bank account access across the application. And then this last tab is going to be our business unit access. This is what allows that bank account to be used throughout the application. So whether you're in payables, whether you're in receivables, and you're using a specific business unit, this is what allows that bank account to be utilized within that module. So that is the core of cash management setup, because, as we relate back to that day in the life, we can't really do anything until we have our bank account set up inside the application. So I really wanted to highlight that. And then we're going to later get onto the configuration that relates to whether it's positioning and how that is used versus reconciliation. But as we get into Oracle's application more, like I had mentioned, this UI provides us with certain modules. that we have access to. So the cash management module houses two different functional areas within it. So we have a section for our cash balances and a section for our bank statements and reconciliation. So where we can manage that reconciliation, manage, when certain processes are run, manage how, if we view bank statements, and then also a section for cash balances where we can make, whether it be fund transfers between our own internal accounts or paying external payees. So to provide a glimpse of what these different functional areas look like, Oracle delivers this dedicated area for specific maintenances of cash balances. So again, this is drilling into the cash balances icon, where we can see a holistic list of our accounts that are reported on a bank statement, see whether it's the closing balance, see what our target balance is, and see what that variance is. That allows us to then either conduct different funding transfers. So this page allows us to have various filtering applied to it, depending on what you need for certain on-demand inquiries into a certain cash position or balance for an account. We are able to expand these filters and look at just a specific bank or an overall holistic view of our accounts. The other icon, so if we were to drill into the bank statement and reconciliation icon, this delivers us, again, more of an area to maintain and reconcile bank statements. So the first thing I want to call out is when you drill into this page, what you're able to see is any processing and errors that occur during the import of certain bank statements. So if a bank statement had errored out or went to warning instead of success, that file and statement ID would appear in this section. It'll give you when that was processed, and then really alert that user that, hey, my bank statement has not been imported into our application. And then that user can either, based on what that business process looks like, manage that on their own or contact their IT team. And then the second section down below is where bank statement reconciliation really lives. And the nice thing about this page is it really gives you that holistic view of bank reconciliation over a time. So we're able to see a list of incomplete statements that we have that have not been fully reconciled. So this will auto-populate based on the date range that we assign here. We can also have the ability to do various searches. So if we're looking at a specific bank, or if we just want to see everything across the board, what this page shows us is, again, any incomplete statement. So we'll see our bank and the various statement IDs expand below, a total number of unreconciled statement lines, a total number of reconciled statement lines, and then that overall total. And so once the bank statement has fully been reconciled, what it does is it automatically moves it to this completed tab. And so then if we were to click over into the completed, we'll see a list of all our bank statements that have been fully reconciled. So it really allows the user to have full transparency into their various business processes. And then a nice feature is you can save specific searches. So if there is a specific user that only looked at US dollar bank accounts or bank accounts under a specific bank, they're able to create their own searches, very personalized to their own user experience that they may save here, and ultimately, decrease the time that is spent searching and going through a list for their account that they need to look at. So that's a brief overview of the two main pages that are used the two only pages that are used within cash management and Oracle. What we're going to start talking about is how it handles bank statement reporting. So the bank statement reporting is really driven off of the connection you have with your financial institution and yourself. So Oracle provides you the ability to connect, whether it's through SFTP, to your bank and pull in bank statements, through various formats, BI2, MT940, into the application based on configuration that we have defined and agreed upon with the bank. That ultimately is what's funneled into our module that we are able to use then for various reporting and reconciliation needs. So how Oracle kind of handles it is it's in a 4-step process. First, we receive that bank statement. We import into the ERP, is available for review inside of the ERP. So you have a number of different ways that you can do that, whether it's going through a manual page or going through predefined reports to intake in the information that has been provided to us. And then the last step is that bank statement is now prepared for bank reconciliation. So again, highlighting the three phases that a bank statement processes through as it relates to Oracle and cash management is the retrieve phase. So again, making that connection with the bank, loading it into the tables, and then importing it finally into cash management. I want to highlight a number of different formats that are supported. So we have our BAI2, Swift, MT940, the ETE2020 Insta, and then a handful of ISO bank statement files. So that depends on what your bank can provide. There's a lot of flexibility, and Oracle covers, the main ones. So once that bank statement's been imported, I wanted to walk through and show the pages that you can use in order to view that bank statement. So they're available for reference through our cash management function area. So again, drilling through that home UI into our bank statements and reconciliation icon. And then we are able to open our task panel. That's this icon over here. And then we can search or drill into our Manage Bank Statements link. And this will display a search page that users can then define certain criteria regarding the bank account that they're looking to review. So again, here's that search page. Again, similar to all other search pages, we have criteria we can define. I pulled up a specific, just an example bank statement where we have our account listed and then the specific statement ID. So this one we can see has been manually imported in. Typically the statement IDs correspond with the date that's been imported. So we'll see like year, dash, month, dash, day, or some variation of that, similar to how that period end looks. So you can easily identify what statement you're looking for. So if we were to drill into that statement, what's going to show us is essentially a 2-tab page. That first tab is going to show us all our balance codes. So if we're just reporting opening and closing balance like this bank account is, it will show those two balance codes. If your bank provides other ones, you can have more defined on this page. But the first screen is going to show you all balances. And then the second one is going to show you specific statement lines. So all that detail that comes within that BAI file will be listed out here. And so what it allows us to do is see these transactions, see the booking date, any transaction code that's assigned to it, that description, the transaction type. If there's a reference, if we're parsing that data out, we'll be able to view it here, the status of that reconciliation, and then any amount, whether it's a deposit or a payment. I do want to touch on this header. What the header allows us to do is view a balance check. So this balance check is making sure that those balance codes are in line and correspond with the statement detail down below here. So it provides you with a self-service check. It tells you how this bank statement has been inputted. So it can be a manual entry, or if it's been imported, it would say imported there. It'll allow us to know if we have an intraday file or a prior day file. Obviously, if it's unchecked, it's going to be a prior day file. And then the status of the reconciliation. So we can see that is complete. Once a bank statement has been imported, we're then able to use it in the various components of cash management. So the first one's going to be our cash balances and treasury payments. So how Oracle pulls together all our various sources of information in order to formulate a cash position is that it uses the various components of our bank statements of our different cloud sources. So whether that's AP invoices, AP payments, AR invoices, AR receipts, payroll entries, or external transactions, and then other third-party transactions as well too. And there are two processes that run that essentially extract all that data and then move it into what Oracle has as their S-based cubes. And so when a bank statement is imported, these two processes are kicked off simultaneously after it. So it'll extract the cash position data, and it'll use the components from our bank account setup and two cash positioning configuration pages in order to pull that data together So it's going to extract it from these sources. It's going to then kick off a transfer process that moves it into these S-based cubes. What these S-based cubes are is it provides Oracle a way to start producing reporting. So it lives in at two cubes, essentially, a transactional cube and a manual cube. That transactional one is, again, what stores our application transactions. So whether it's from a bank statement, from those various sources, and then we have a manual cube where we can input in manual entries. And once these two cubes have been populated, we're then able to use the system to provide reporting in a number of different ways. So the first one is going to be within the application itself. So it will look like that the cash balances page, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but it's going to use the data that's provided in the cubes and populate the respective data based on those searches. We would be able to use these this data in OTBI reports. So that's more of our ad hoc analysis, whether it's looking at queries as it relates to bank statements. BI publisher reports, this is our more predefined reports. And then ultimately we have the option of Smart View. Now, Smart View is an add-on, a Microsoft-based add-on to Oracle that allows for an established connection to be made between Excel back into Oracle for a more in-depth data analysis. So it really builds a connection between the two, pulls the data from these cubes into an Excel template that then allows you to conduct various cash position analysis. So if you need to check your inflows, outflows, it will populate that based on the parameters that the cash position is reported, and then actually provides drill down capabilities from Excel back into the application, where you can drill into it and then it'll open Oracle Cloud page that then will show certain transactions that make up that amount. But this next page is really going to show what these cubes do inside of the application. So we're able to perform our cash balances report. So again, you saw this as that UI that is populated when we drill into the icon. So the main thing here is that we're able to pull data from our bank statements, pull data from our bank account, create that analysis in order to see any variance, to see if our account is overfunded or underfunded, and then make any type of payment or transfer in order to get us in balance. So again, it gives us high level information on an overall cash balance. So this relates to all the accounts shown here, a total variance. So it adds up these variances for us. And it also allows us to see what accounts are missing bank statements. And we can change the parameters by using this filter and get different reports generated from here. And so when we use this page and we see, okay, our multi-currency account is overfunded by $757,000 and some change. What we're able to do is create various payments directly within the application from here. So we can either make a payment, which is going to make an external payment, not to one of our own bank accounts, or we can do a transfer of funds. So if we were to drill into the transfer of funds button at the top of the screen, we can either drill in there, or there's its own dedicated page within the task panel. It's going to provide us a create bank account transfer, essentially form. So we're able to define our from account, our to account, the date of that transfer, and the amount of that transfer. And this is going to be similar to how other applications do, or whether you log into your bank portal, create that internal transfer, so between two of our own internal bank accounts. And what cash management allows us to do is then settle this transaction through payments. Now, payments technically lives under the payables module, but it's its own, in essence, it's its own hub that really facilitates the formatting and the transmission of various payment files to whatever established connections we have with the bank. So we either have the option of just creating this transfer, and what you would then do is log into your bank portal and manually enter it in, or we can settle this transfer through payments by checking this box, and then we just have to provide a bit more information regarding the business unit that's tied to, the payment method we're using. So whether it's ACH, wire, EFT, separate backs, whatever we have, and then a payment profile, which the way the demo environment is set up is based on the payment layout, but this profile is really how it's going to generate that payment. So this is a total optional field, whether we have those file formats already validated and ready to go for transmission, or if we just want to recognize this transfer had occurred, it's all through the click of this button. So that's a fund transfer between two internal accounts, but we also have the functionality of doing within cash management is doing any ad hoc payments. So this ad hoc payments page is used to transfer ad hoc funds from an internal bank account to an external payee bank account. What cash management does is it will maintain a list of these external payees where you define that, payee name, define the bank account details for that payee, so that you have easy access of just creating these, ad hoc payments. And when we say ad hoc payments, we just mean these one-off payments that aren't connected to an invoice that would typically be handled through payments or payables. So again, similar to the transfer funds page, we define the bank account we are transferring money from, that specific payee. So we define the payee here, and then it automatically pulls in the account information for us, define our payment date, define the amount we're sending, and any conversion rate. What this also allows us to do is define any accounting coding that goes along with this payment. So we're able to define a cash account directly here and its offset account that will be used once this payment has been accounted for. One thing I do want to call out regarding defining accounting is that this cash account is derived from the bank account setup. So we touched on that briefly when we defined the GL cash account on the bank account. If we were to leave this cash account field blank, it will just, the application, when it creates that accounting entry, look back into the bank account and automatically apply that for us. So if we wanted to account for it, we would really, best practice would be to allow the bank account to derive, or to allow the transfer to derive the bank account cash account, and then define the offset account for us. And then similar to transfer of funds, we have the ability to either say if we want this to actually be formatted and sent through payments or stay within cash management. So if we were to select the settle transaction through payments, we'll define our business unit, the payment method, and the payment profile. All right, so then I want to move on to bank reconciliation and how Oracle Cloud kind of manages that. So within cash management, we're able to perform an automatic reconciliation that takes a handful of different configuration pages and applies it to the bank statement when it is imported in, or when the process is kicked off, I should say. So we are able to define various parse rule sets where we can move, whether that's a transaction ID from, let's say your bank passes it in the addenda field, but really we need it in a specific field, like the reconciliation reference field, to create a match to facilitate that auto recon. We define various transaction codes and type mapping that gets applied to the bank statement that also assists in more detailed information regarding transactions. And then ultimately we get into the bulk of it, where we define matching rules, tolerance rules, and then use those to create a matching rule set that gets applied to a bank account. Once we have all this configuration in, we're able to perform auto reconciliation against a bank statement. And so that bank statement will use a number of different sources. So payables transactions, receivables transactions, any cash transactions, whether that be your transfers or ad hoc payments, or even external transactions that you can create manually. And it will use those, do the compare, and create your matches based on the rules that we have defined on that bank account. One kind of cool new feature I've seen within Oracle Cloud that I haven't seen in a couple other ERPs is that we're able to use the general ledger as a source of reconciliation. And so we're able to do a bank statement reconciliation against actual journal entries. So I know that's a feature that other ERPs tend to lack, but Cloud allows you to do that. And it's a typical question we get when we're looking to implement cash management. So that is a brief overview. What I'm going to get into now is more of all those configuration pages that make up this reconciliation. So again, where we start with it is defining our parse rule set. What this allows us to do is parse inbound data and other fields into more granular constituent fields that we will then use as reference data for account reconciliation. So we can define a single parse set for all bank accounts, or we can get specific rule sets defined by a bank, because it's all maintained at a bank account level. So what this really composes of is all our various BI codes and how we're going to pull data from the different components of that bank statement into more reconciliation friendly fields. So this is typically what we see when we start looking at checks and reconciling checks, is that a big problem with checks is that when the bank provides that number back, we have a bunch of leading zeros. What we're able to do here is define parse rule sets that will then take the bank number provided that has those leading zeros, write a rule that will then chop those leading zeros off, that is more friendly to the auto reconciliation process for what payables has recorded. So we're able to define that for, like I said, checks, which typically has a transaction code of 475. We define the field that comes into the bank statement, and then the field that we want the application to use. And then we define the syntax that's going to produce that parsing for us. The next component of reconciliation is defining any tolerances. So there are two different tolerances that you're able to apply to reconciliation rules. The first one being date tolerance, which again, using checks as an example, you may have a check that has been issued on one day but does not clear the bank until days or weeks later, depending on when it gets cashed. So date tolerances are defined as a day range in order to validate transaction dates within a certain number of days before or after the bank statement line date. The second one is going to be our amount tolerances, which are commonly used when there may be a difference due to rounding and conversion rates. So if you're dealing with a lot of international payments or multi-currency bank accounts, you're able to define amount tolerances that will then account for that type of rounding error. If there is any amount difference within that tolerance, that external transaction is created for us then, and then it uses the account coding that we have defined on the bank account itself. 2 points to consider when we're setting up reconciliation tolerances is that if there's no data or amount tolerance defined within a rule, it requires an exact match. And then the second point being a tolerance can be linked to a matching rule in the rule set configuration task and can be applied if the matching rule matches on the date or amount, or both. Ultimately, the point we want to make with this line is that if a tolerance is assigned that includes amount tolerances to a matching rule that isn't a one-to-one match, the amount tolerance is ignored. So what we're able to do is define these matching rules at a one-to-one, a one-to-many, a many-to-one, or many-to-many level. And so only amount tolerances at that one-to-one level are applied. I believe we are able to see how that page looks inside of the sub and maintenance page. So what we do is we define a recon tolerance rule, give it a description, denote if it's been active or inactive, and then we define the type of tolerance it is. So we have a date tolerance again, we just check enable, define the date range. So this one's looking back a year and looking forward a year or 60 days. And then we can do the same for amount tolerances. So this would be a specific dollar amount tolerance. And then we have a percentage amount tolerance. And then what Cloud does is it really provides transparency when we're looking at those configuration pages as to where this, tolerance, or, we'll see this on the other reconciliation pages to where this rule has been applied. So it'll give us the bank it's been applied to, but also the rule set that it's been applied to. So once we've defined our parsing rule sets and we've defined our tolerances, we're then able to define matching rules. Depending on how we perform that bank reconciliation, it can be a one-to-one reconciliation, so one bank statement line to one system side transaction. So for example, a wire or a wire or a check, we have a one-to-one, many rule we can define. So again, one bank statement line to many system side transactions. So that would be more like our ACH batches. We have a many to many reconciliation. So many bank statements to many system side transactions. This I've seen done for like credit card transactions. And then a many to one reconciliation where we have many bank statement lines to one cloud transaction. So that would be like multiple wires sent for one voucher. And so what that configuration page looks like when we're defining these rules is that it has its own dedicated task where we're able to define matching rules to determine how the bank statement lines match to the system transaction lines. So again, we define it with a name and a description. We say what source this is applied to. So this source will kind of dictate how we name this rule. So we're able to say what the source is. We can define multiple sources. Typically, when we implement this, we'll define a rule per source. So we have a payables one-to-one rule. We can have a receivables one-to-one rule, payroll, external transactions, or journal. So again, this is our journal entries, reconciliation. External transactions would be any manual cash management transactions we enter in, payroll, any payroll transactions interfaced in, and same with payables and receivables. Then we get down to our matching type. So we define what type of match we are conducting. So in this example, we're doing a one-to-one match, and then we define our matching criteria here. And so what this rule is looking at is it's going to be look at all our payable transactions. It's going to try and auto reconcile these transactions on a one-to-one basis using the criteria that the amount matches and the reconciliation reference matches. And then if this was assigned to any bank account, we'd be able to see that bank account and that rule set it has been applied to. And then what this shows us is a one-to-many setup as well too. The only difference is that we are able to define how system transactions are being grouped. So how we group that many together in order to reconcile to the one bank statement line. In this example, it's going to be based off the remittance batch number. So in Oracle, they should all have the same batch number, and then we're able to match based on amount. Once we have defined our matching rules, we're able to build these rule sets. And these rule sets are what house the matching rule plus any tolerance that is applied to it. And these are what ultimately gets assigned to our bank account to facilitate that auto reconciliation. So inside a specific rule set, again, we can have multiple defined. We give it a name, and then we sequence the rules as how we want them to be applied to that bank statement. So if this was with this sequencing of the rules, we have this matching rule being applied first on a one-to-one basis, and then using the tolerance rule. So I've seen this, Ben, we get very specific rules being applied first to clear up as much of the data that we want to reconcile as we can. And then we can get less and less granular as to how that rule gets applied because it's going to follow the sequencing here. So it is a must that we prioritize and sequence the rules in an order that we want them executed. And so again, similar to all the other configuration pages, we're able to see how that bank account, how this rule set is applied to the bank account. So if we had this rule set defined to 10 bank accounts, we'd see a list of all 10 defined here. And then the last component before we get into actually reconciling a statement are these bank statement creation rules. So again, these rules are typically used for transactions that we consider as first presentment items. So the first time we see this transaction would be on a bank statement. So examples of this include like account analysis fees, bank charges, interest, and other transactions originating outside of the system. This provides us a lot of flexibility in order to make sure that we are reconciling as many items as we can automatically so that we can create efficiencies and free up time for business users to not worry so much about the day in, day out of a manual reconciliation, but more important, other factors of their job. So what we define here is, again, a unique name for this transaction or creation rule, and then the legal entity that's applied to. Define the legal entity here allows certain rules to be applied to certain bank accounts. And then we define our statement line criteria. So what this rule is doing is that it's looking at transaction codes 698, ensuring that the transaction type is fee, and then it would look into the search field, which we would typically define as additional addenda. If we're looking for a specific transaction, we would define a search string here for what that addenda field contains, and then facilitate that auto reconciliation by using that as a criteria, and then ultimately creating us an automatic external transaction with the same fee or transaction type of fee using this business unit. So in this example for this fee, what we're looking at is for Citibank 1448, any fee code that comes in using the transaction code of 698, it's going to auto reconcile because we've left this blank. We can get more specific if we're looking for a certain sequence of characters in the addenda. And then what we're able to do is denote any accounting that gets applied to the transaction when it gets reconciled. So this is a flag that we can check on or off. If we check it on, we can again define that cash count in the offset account. So once we have gone through, and I know that was a lot, but all the configurations set up for a reconciliation, we're able to kick off the auto recon process. So this is a process that can be scheduled to run as soon as this bank statement has been imported, or it can be manually kicked off as a reconciler comes in for the day. So this lives within, again, that bank statements and reconciliation icon. We open our task panel, we're able to submit auto reconciliation. So what I'm showing here is that we have a bank statement and we have a transaction that we have a system or bank statement line and a corresponding system line. And so if we were to submit our auto reconciliation process, it opens up this run control. So we define our bank account, and then we can define a specific statement ID or a range of dates that we'd want to run auto reconciliation for. And while that runs based on the rule that we have defined on that bank account, it will then auto reconcile that transaction on that one-to-one basis. So then it moves from our unreconciled tab over to our reconciled tab, and we're able to see it here as a reconciled item. What you're able to do from this screen too is, let's say the rule wasn't specific enough and accidentally reconciles the incorrect transaction, we're able to select a group, the specific group that we are looking to unreconcile, and then this button will become active and we can unreconcile transaction. It'll move it back into the unreconciled status. The second piece of the auto reconciliation process goes back to creating those bank statement creation rules. So it has its own run control called generate cash transactions. So once auto recon has completed, there are typically transactions that remain on the bank statement that do not have a system side transaction to match with. So again, these tend to be our first presentment items, bank fees, service charges, credit card fees, DBAs. We can facilitate that auto reconciliation through those configured rules that use the addendum of the bank statement. So similar to submitting auto recon, this has its own run control page that is found under as that generate cash transactions hyperlink. So here, what I'm showing on this bank statement is that we have a bank fee and an interest charge here that we would expect to be reconciled using those creation rules. So using that one that we showed earlier for that 698 BI code, we would open up that run control, define our bank account, define the range of dates or statement ID that we're looking to run against, and perform that reconciliation. So what that does now is then, because of how that is configured, it auto reconciles that interest and fee charge based on the criteria of that creation rule, and then automatically creates that external transaction for us. And then once the subledger accounting has been ran, it will automatically create the accounting entry that corresponds to this reconciliation. And so in the last 10 minutes, what I want to cover is just some of the predefined reports that we have access to as it relates from Oracle to cash management. So Oracle Cash Management provides predefined reports that are used in the following areas. So we have a bank statements report, we have a cash and transfer report, and we have a cash to general ledger reconciliation report. These are already pre-built inside of Oracle's Transactional Business Intelligence, or OTBI, and these are seeded reports that come delivered with the application. The first one I'm covering is going to be the bank statement report. This displays our bank account balances and transaction information for specific bank accounts. This report is used to review activity of that bank account. And then I have an example of the run control. So what you would do is define that specific bank account and then that date range you're looking at, and it'll provide you a list of the balances and a list of the transactions that are found on that report, on the specific bank account or the corresponding bank accounts. The second report that is used and really facilitated through bank reconciliation is the cash and transfer report. This cash and transfer report lists, again, for a specific bank account, all transactions that have been remitted to the bank but have not been cleared. So it gives us a view as to what we're still waiting and why a statement could not be fully reconciled. So it'll show us it will not show us voided transactions. It will not show us reverse transactions with a reversal date prior to the as of date. So that as of date is important when we start looking at that run control. So again, we define our bank account. We can define a specific source, but typically we leave this blank so that we pull all sources relating to that bank account, and then we define an as of date. And so again, what this shows us is then all transactions that have not been remitted to, or that have been remitted to the bank but not reported back to us. And so you can see all our payments in transit for a specific bank account, which then will tie back to, transactions that have not been reconciled. And then the last report I want to touch briefly on is the cash to general ledger reconciliation report. So this compares the GL cash account balance against the bank account balance. It displays the unreconciled GL cash account journal entries and unreconciled bank statement lines that help identify the discrepancies between the balances. So it really gives us an in-depth analysis and transparency into what's making up any discrepancies, and then done on a specific range of periods. This report lists, again, the sub-ledger transactions that are counted in GL, but they're not reconciled in cash. So a lot of the cash in transit transactions, and then also considers, and then a consideration again is assigning a unique GL cash account for each bank account, as this report uses that coding to pull the GL entries. And so again, this is a quick view of that run control where you define the bank account and then you define the accounting period that you're looking for. If you want to look at just a single account, you have a from and to. If you want to look at multiple periods, you can define a longer period. But again, this report gives us this output where it's based off of the cash account that is defined. So again, that's why we are really hitting on the fact that best practice is to define a single cash account per bank account, because if we had multiple cash accounts, it would be pulling all that into this report, even though you're looking at a single bank account. And it will list out our balances for our book balance and then any bank balance, and then the unreconciled amounts by source. So I believe this is my last slide before our Q&A. What I want to do, make a quick comment at, and it kind of contradicts that best practice of setting up a single cash account for a bank statement account. What we've been able to do at a handful of our clients is customize both this report and our cash in transit report for an instance where you do have a single cash account going against multiple bank accounts. Because a typical issue we've seen and run into is that by the time you get to cash management and start using it inside of Oracle Cloud, is you've already implemented, whether it be receivables or payables, and you already have kind of your GL chart of accounts set up, and you may not have followed that one cash account to one bank account logic, and that can create quite a bit of headache when you start using these seeded reports. So we've actually been able to customize these reports to take that into account. And I think at this time I'm going to hand it back over to Jordan.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions here in the Q&A. So first one, it says, for a retail business, can the reconciliation processes handle files from third-party payment processors rather than just from banks? For example, CSV files from credit card processing institutions, can it reconcile them against receivables or customer accounts?
Yeah, so Oracle Cash Management allows you to, you have the ability to upload bank statements. You have the ability to manually create bank statements and create transactions using, external from the system. When you start talking about credit card, I know that lives within the expenses module, and I would question a little bit more if it's more procurement card related. But if that transaction, let's say you have a list of credit card transactions that show up on the bank statement, you are then able to do an upload through the external transactions for those corresponding rows, or handle them through bank statement creation rules. So yes, you are able to reconcile, credit card transaction as it relates to your business.
Awesome. And then next question. So are processes able to be scheduled like importing bank statements or reconciliation?
Yes, Cloud does offer the ability to schedule these processes out. It is actually on that specific run control page. If you go under more of the advanced options, you can set specific parameters as to how often you want that process to be ran. And then once you have set it, it is then scheduled out indefinite until you have stopped it.
And then, not sure if you answered this already, but one more around reconciliation. Can you still reconcile transactions from a bank if they can't provide an electronic bank statement file?
Yes. So you can. What you have to do, you can do is either manually import that bank statement. And when I say manually, is you create that bank statement essentially in an Excel based file that then is uploaded into the application. And it's done through, Oracle delivers it as one of the tasks inside of that task panel. So you can manually upload bank statements and then process that reconciliation against it.
Excellent. And with that, we are at the end of our time. A couple of closing remarks as we wrap up the Elire Treasury experience. Again, the ETE library will be available next week with session recordings and PDF versions of the presentations, as well as with the assessment links for all of the CTP CCM credit sessions. Elire team members are happy to answer any questions that you have following the event. We will be sending out a post-event survey to hear your feedback. Please take 5 minutes. We would love to hear what you thought of the conference, this being our initial conference here, and use those improvements for future ETEs. And then last of all, I do want to thank everyone for their time over the last 2 days. The Elire team was thrilled to have you, as well as our valued software partners here, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.